Uh, Today, I'm going to talk about little things. And I got a couple of questions here initially that I want to ask you. What is your definition of doing great things for God? Now, admittedly, I don't know how many people I'm talking to. I don't know how many people at some point are going to see this message or hear this message. But I will venture to make a wild guess that very, very few people sit around all day thinking, oh, what can I do for God today? A lot of us are in contact with God a lot during the day. Lord, give me this. Lord, give me that. Help me this. Help me that. I need this and I need that. We're in contact with God a lot. But the question I pose is, how many think about what we can do for God? And I'd venture to say very few of us. And since when we talk about God, it is in the religious arena, I think most of us who might think about what we can do for God think of it in religious terms. First knee-jerk reaction would be, well, a preacher or a teacher or a missionary or somebody like that, they can do great things for God. But I'm just a housewife, or I'm just a granny, or I'm a worker that's got two jobs and trying to put food on the table. I'm not hardwired into thinking about what I can do for God. That's for the preachers. Okay, that's for the guys who are going to build the big churches and write books and so forth. But me in my world, that's not what I think about. And I think most of us miss the boat on that. That because we're not in the religious arena, that we don't really think that we, in our lives, have an impact on doing stuff for God. Most of us, in fact, all of us really, we think about careers. We think about getting ahead in life. We think about earning enough money to support our families, have enough left over to do some goof-off things, take vacations, or have dinner out and so forth. Buy the latest upgrades in iPhones and iPads and whatnot. No, just a comfortable life. That's where most of our thinking is. And the rest of it, unfortunately, is taken up with a reactionary approach to life. And what I mean by that is this. You wake up in the morning and you've got, let's say it's a Saturday. You don't have to go to work that day. And maybe you're going to mow the lawn, or maybe you're going to just goof off and just lounge around and do nothing. And along about 7, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, whatever, the wife comes out and says, oh, I was taking my shower and the water didn't drain. And you think, oh, all right. Well, my day is set. Now you get on the phone, you call the plumber. He says, well, will somebody be there between 10 and 4? Well, so now between 10 o'clock in the morning and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you're frozen in that thing. Whatever plans you had are out the window. You are now in the reaction mode to life. You get into work. Your boss told you 2 or 3 days ago, I need this report done by such and such a time. And so today you're going to finish it up. You're going to polish it off. You're going to be able to present it to them. And you get in there at 7:30 in the morning or so. They say, oh, there's an emergency conference meeting. And everybody has to meet in the conference room. So you go in the conference room and whatever comes down the pike and it hits you with a ton of bricks. And now you have to react to that. And so the report gets slid off, or it gets put in incomplete. If you really think about it, most of our lives is in reaction to things that happen to us. You get on the phone, you're talking to somebody, and they say, "Oh, did you hear what such and such said about so and so?" And now you get the gossip mill going here. And you might get your nose bent out of joint, or you might take offense to somebody said that was said about you. And so you react to that. Just take any day of your life and think about the reactionary parts of that day opposed to the things that you want to do and can successfully get done that day. And we're amazed how much of our lives are reactionary. Have you ever wondered why, after you got saved, that God just didn't take you immediately? Take you up to heaven. Some of us got saved, at 7, 8 years old. Some in their teens, some in their 20s, some later in life. I can understand maybe if you're young and you get saved, God didn't want to take life away from you as such, and so he lets you stay. But old people, they get saved, or you're saved and then you become an old people. How come God just doesn't take you? I mean, he takes us eventually. But why does God allow us to stay here and remain here as long as he does? And again, let's get back into the secular world and the religious world. Some might say, well, if you're a preacher or if you're a teacher, well, God will let you stay here longer because you have more of a religious influence than somebody who's maybe a plumber or a salesman or a teacher that have nothing to do with religion or nothing to do with God in their professional life. Well, God doesn't work that way. You're saved at 7 years old, and God might allow you to live to be 87 years old, and you might not crack a Bible in your life. You might not ever preach a day in your life. You might not talk to anybody about religion or God or the Bible in your life. And God has let you live all that time. And you're a good person. God is pleased with you. Sometimes we get the idea that the only things that God is pleased about is if we do something in the religious arena for him. And that's not right. Have you ever wondered? These are a series of questions that I have today just about an introspective approach to Christianity. What, in your estimation, is doing great things for God? Can you do great things for God? Are you expected to do great things for God? What are great things for God? Why are you left here? Did God have a specific job for you and you've already blown it, let's say? Your life in the mind of God was intended to be A, B, and C. And through sin, through neglect, through rebellion, through personal opinions or anything else, your life has degenerated into X, Y, and Z. That's a possibility. Some of us live our entire lives and we don't have a clue what God might want for us to do. We don't sit around and think about it. We know that we didn't go to seminary. We didn't go to Bible college. We don't preach. And so, no, the whole connect thing between us doing something for God and not is just, it doesn't even come into play. But I'm asking you today to actually think about that, whether you're retired, whether you're a salesman, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a plumber, whether you're a mechanic, whatever it happens to be. Ask yourself, is there or has there been something that God wants me to do? And it doesn't have to be in the religious realm. Just, is there something, a connect between me and God that we can be partners in? That He has a job for me to do. And I do it. Doesn't have to be religious. 1 Corinthians chapter 3. This passage has to do with Christian works. You get saved, whatever age. And from that moment on, God has given you a clean slate to the day you die. And within that clean slate, or let's just say a blank piece of paper, and you're going to draw a picture on it. And that picture takes place the moment you get saved until the day that either God takes you home or the rapture comes or something. And between those two fixed points in your life, you are painting a picture. What kind of picture are you drawing? Little kids, when they start school, they bring home a picture to stick on the fridge, and it might be a family. And you got the little house with the little tree and the little chimney and the little smoke coming out of it and a little door and a couple of windows. And then you got the mom and dad, the two stick figures there, and one or two little stick figures for the kids. And that's what the kid is drawn. That's in their mind. That is, literally, that is their house. That is their mom and dad. And yet it's depicted as that traditional little stick figure. You know, you got the little circle for the head, the little vertical stick for the body, and the two legs coming out, and little two arms coming out the side, and a couple little, squirrelies at the end for the fingers. And I'll guarantee that in the mind of a kid, if you show that little picture to them, and they say, who is this? That is mom and dad. Couldn't be more mom and dad if you tried. Now, you can get up into the Rembrandt stage, and you can depict, you can't tell the difference of a photo and a picture. You can get that good. And of course, in the artist's mind, that is who it's supposed to be. They're both true. It's just from different perspectives. And so, you've painted a picture in your Christian life. Some of the things that you've done in life are good things. Some of the things you've done in life are not so good. They're bad. They're evil. Maybe some of them are things of omission, things that God wanted you to do, but you didn't do. Now, in your mind, you haven't sinned. You haven't done something wrong. It's not like you've gone out and committed murder or adultery or rape or, some bad thing. But maybe there was something that God wanted you to do, but you didn't do it. In His mind, you've sinned. Now, we know what the reverse of that is. We know that if we rob a bank, we've done something wrong. But if God says to you, I want you to do this particular thing over here, and He conveys that through impression, He conveys that through conviction, He conveys that through the Holy Spirit into your heart, and God wants you to do something. Well, I'm not qualified to do it, or I'm not, maybe he wants you to talk to somebody about the Lord. Maybe it's somebody at work, maybe a neighbor, maybe a friend, maybe somebody at the Elks Lodge, whatever it happens to be. He wants you to talk to them. And then we go into self-defense mode. Well, I'm not a preacher. I'm not familiar with the Bible. I don't know what to say if they say this. I don't know the verses to come back with that. I don't know this. I don't know. And so we back off. God says, talk to him. Say, I'm not qualified to talk to him. I don't feel comfortable talking to him. I'm going to make it worse by talking to him to show that I'm an abject idiot when it comes to spiritual things or biblical things. And so I'm not going to make it worse by opening my mouth and letting him know that I'm an idiot. I'll just back off and shut up and let somebody else talk to him. And God's sitting there looking down. He says, no, there is nobody else. I've picked you. I didn't pick plan B or plan C. You are the one. But we've talked ourselves into not doing it for all the above reasons. Okay. That comes under the category of what we're going to see here in a second as wood, hay, or stubble. Two categories of things that we get. We can do things for God, or we can do things for ourselves, or just not do things for God. Two categories. Start to read, and you'll see what I mean. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, beginning at verse 11. 1 Corinthians 3:11. For other foundation can no man lay than that is laid, which is Jesus Christ. He's the foundation. Everything starts with him. Verse 12. Now, if any man build upon this foundation, he's talking about Christians now. He's not talking about the world. He's not talking about, just Joe Blow down the block. He's talking to Christians here, that their foundation is Jesus Christ. That's the foundation. That if any man build upon this foundation gold, silver, precious stone, those are the good things, or the neutral type things here, wood, hay, stubble. So you can see right going out the gate, there's two categories: gold, silver, precious stone, wood, hay, and stubble. Anybody can see the difference of these two. Verse 13. Every man's work, that's what we're talking about here. The work that you do from point A, when you became a Christian, to point X, when you die and you croak or the Lord comes back, in between those 2 points, that is the work that you do. Whether it's Christian work, whether the work of a mom raising her kids, whether it be the work of a dad who is supporting the family, the work that you do is going to fall into one of these two categories: gold, silver, precious stone, or wood, hay, and stubble. Every man's work shall be made manifest, verse 13. For the day shall declare it, because it shall be revealed by fire. And the fire shall try every man's work of what sort it is. This is not a Christian being judged whether or not he's going to go to heaven or hell. Your salvation is not the issue in this passage. He's not talking about good Christians, bad Christians type thing. He's not talking about any of this other stuff. He's talking about the work that you do as a Christian. Verse 14. If any man's work abide, which he hath built thereupon, he shall receive a reward. You see, immediately there's a distinction between the two, the wood, hay, and stubble, and the gold, silver, precious stone. If you put a flame to the gold, silver, and precious stone, nothing happens. As far as the gold and the silver are concerned, it gets better. The hotter the flame, the better they get, because the impurities are burned out of them. But the consistent thing about the other three, the wood, hay, and stubble, is you put a flame to those and they burn up. They're gone. They're just nothing but ashes left. So basically what he's saying is your life, your life's work, the things that you do are coming into one of two different categories. Those that will endure the fire of judgment, and those things that are going to get burned up in the judgment. Verse 15, if any man's work shall be burned, that's the wood, hay, and stubble. All the lies that you committed, the times that you may have been unfaithful, the times that you were lazy, the times that you didn't do what you were supposed to do, the gossip, the idle talk, the maliciousness, the backbiting, the jealousy, the rage, just fill in the blank. If any man's work shall be burned, he shall suffer loss. So going out the gate, God had a plan for you. Plan A. Then we get involved and we start to screw up. We don't do what we should. We renege on promises. Oh, Lord, I'll never do this again. We do it. Oh, Lord, I'm going to endeavor to read my Bible through this year. We get up to the middle of Genesis and we poop out. Oh, Lord, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And we don't do it. So we get involved in God's plan and we screw it up. We mess it up. And so God has to react. Remember, all life is basically reactionary. When we sin, God has to do something. He just can't ignore it. So when we sin, God has to intervene, and that intervention is not happy, and it is not nice for us. If any man's work shall be burned, he shall suffer loss. How many Christians are going to stand before God? Having lived a lifetime of, 20, 30, 40, 50 years as a Christian. And the moment they open their eyes and behold him in the flesh standing right in front of them, that their first reaction is, oh, gee, I screwed up. Oh, gee whiz. One look in his eyes, and I know I have failed him. Oh, gee whiz, why didn't I do this? Or why did recriminations, remorse, regret? I should have done this, or I shouldn't have done that. You've suffered loss. You could have had a stature this big as far as the eyes of the Lord are concerned. But because of the way you lived your life and you screwed up, you bring this to the table. If any man's work shall be burned, he shall suffer loss, but he himself shall be saved. Like I said, we're not talking about salvation here, whether you're going to get it or keep it and so forth. Yet so is by fire. So what constitutes doing things for God? When you think about that term, what pops into your head? Well, let me give you a few little things that maybe didn't pop into your head. And some of these are fairly long passages and so forth, so I'm not going to read them all, but I'll just kind of tell the story here. Back in 2 Kings, Israel was fighting Syria. And in those days, Syria is much, much bigger than it is today. It incorporated Syria. It incorporated what we would call today Lebanon and the whole northern part of what is today Israel and so forth. So it was a much bigger thing back in those days. But there was a war between Syria and Israel. And Israel at this particular point got beat, and Syria was over them. And a little girl was captured from Israel. She was taken up to Syria, to Damascus, and she was made a slave or a servant girl to the wife of the head of the Assyrian army, the general of all the Syrian troops. And by all accounts, the Bible said this was a great man. He was a good guy. He was the enemy of Israel, but, morally and every other way, he was a good guy. But he had leprosy. And leprosy goes through various stages. You can be a leper, and, that's bad. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. And then you can be a leper who's already in the process of losing fingers and toes and noses and lips and so forth. I mean, it can get absolutely devastating. He hadn't got to that point yet, but he was still a leper. And one day the little servant girl, the little Israeli girl, who was the slave now, basically, of this guy's wife, she overhears the wife talking either to the husband or to somebody else about this guy's leprosy. And she pipes up and she says to the lady, she says, there's a prophet in Israel. And if my Lord, meaning Naaman, the leper, head of the army, if he went down and talked to this prophet, the prophet would heal him. Well, the wife, she perks up on this thing. She says, wow. And so she sends a message to the king of Israel, who's subservient to the king of Syria, obviously at this point. And she says, I'm going to send my husband down there, and I want you to introduce him to the prophet, and I want you to heal him. The king of Israel hears this, and he says, good grief, what is going on here? I don't have this kind of power to heal anybody. And I don't, Elisha, I don't know what his plans are here. Why have you put me in this condition that if the guy doesn't get healed, he's going to take my head off here? Just leave me out of this whole thing. So they finally talked Naaman into going down and seeing the prophet, Elisha. And Naaman, he comes with his whole entourage, a couple of hundred guys or so forth, and chariots and the bands and the banners and the whole ball of wax. And he comes to Elisha. And he says, I want to get healed. Do your magic. And Elisha looks at him and he says, I'll tell you what. See the Jordan River here? And the Jordan River is not like the Mississippi. It's, in some places, it's really narrow. You can, 30-second walk and you're across the thing. And it's not the cleanest river. So Naaman says, I see the river there. Well, Elisha says, I'll tell you what. You get into that river and you dip down 7 times. And on the 7th time, when you come up, you're going to be healed. Leprosy is going to be all gone. Naaman just about lost his head on this thing. He couldn't believe that this guy is that idiotic. He said, look, I've got better rivers in Damascus. I'm in them all the time. I'm still a leper. And you're telling me if I dip down here 7 times, I'm going to get healed? You're out of your mind. He turns around and he heads off back. One of his servants says, just wait, hold on a second. If the prophet had told you to do some great thing, I don't know, high dive off a 20-story building and, do a corkscrew backflip upside down, inverted inside out thing, you would have done it, right? And he says, well, I guess. Well, he's asking you to do this stupid little idiotic thing about dipping a river 7 times. What have you got to lose? You're still a leper. You're here. Humor him. Just go through it. All right, since I'm here, I'll do it. So he goes down, boom, boom, 7 times. He comes up 7th time, and he is clean as a little baby. He is cured of his leprosy. Now, you ask yourself sometimes, how does God work? Do you think maybe, because the end result of this thing is that Israel now has on their side, in gratitude, in debt, as it were, the head of the Syrian army. That was a biggie then. Now Syria's not going to come down and do raids and incursions and all this other stuff and make life a lot worse for them. Israel is benefited by this relationship now. Do you think, I don't know, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years before this event, when Syria came down and they conquered Israel, and this little girl was taken, for her folks, for her relatives, I'm sure that was the worst day in the history of their lives. That their little girl, 8, 10, 12 years old, was taken captive by a foreign enemy and took back to their place to be a slave and a handmaiden for somebody. Worst day of their lives. Never going to see her again. No communication. Never know what's going to become of her. Never see her grow up and get married and have kids, and so that they have grandkids and so forth they can interact with. It was the worst day of their lives. All around. And she served all those years as the handmaiden. And she overhears a conversation. And she responds positively to what she heard. And all she did, she didn't heal him. She didn't wave her hand over and say hocus pocus or any of this stuff. All she said was, to the lady, there is a prophet in Israel. He can heal you. That was her life's work as far as God was concerned. Yeah, she may have grown up and got married and had kids. Yeah, she may have been a faithful handmaiden and maybe even became a friend, whatever, to this lady. She may have lived a fruitful life. She may have just had life came out okay for her. We don't know. But I do know this, that there's a reason that God put that in 2 Kings, is to teach us something. She had a mission to do. And when the time came, she did. Do you think she recognized what she had done? Do you think that she knew in that passing little comment that she made that she had changed the history of Israel for the better for that period of time? The repercussions and the dominoes were endless here. Matthew chapter 21, verse 1. Matthew 21. Jesus is getting ready to come into Israel, or Jerusalem, and being proclaimed as the king. And for the king of Israel to come in and be proclaimed, usually they always had to ride on a donkey. That was the processional thing. Not a great big horse, big flaming war horse and all that stuff. For some reason, Israel in their cultural history had picked that the king would be presented on a donkey. Okay. Comes time for him to be brought into Israel, or into Jerusalem rather. They don't have a donkey. The disciples don't have anything. They don't have money for a donkey. They don't have any need for a donkey. But Jesus says, no. He said, I need a donkey today. And so they scurry around. Who's got a donkey? Oh, I don't have a donkey. Do you know how many? No. Jesus said, look, you go down the road and there's a guy over there. He's got a donkey. You bring him. You got the mom donkey and you got the little kid donkey, whatever, and you bring him. I need him. Verse 2, chapter 21, Matthew, verse 2, saying unto them, go into the village over against you, and straightway you shall find an ass, that's a donkey, and a colt with her. Loose them and bring them unto me. This is Jesus speaking. And if any man say aught unto you, if anybody says, what are you doing taking that donkey? Ye shall say unto them, the Lord hath need of them. Can you imagine? This is the Lord of the universe. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is the one that said, and let there be light. This is the Lord of the universe, and he finds himself, in this particular instance, as a man. He needs a donkey. He doesn't have one on hand. He could have made one. He could have created one on the spot. He doesn't work like that generally. He lets us participate. And so he says, go down the street. There's a guy with a donkey there. Get him. The Lord hath need of him. Guy gives up the donkey. I don't know, filling in the blank here. 20 years go by. And him and his old cronies are all sitting around talking about life and so forth. And somebody brings up the fact, oh, you remember the day Jesus came into Jerusalem riding on that donkey? Boy, wasn't that neat? And the guy's sitting there and he says, yeah, that was the greatest day of my life. Why was it the greatest day in your life? Because that was my donkey he rode in on. No, yeah. I was sitting there minding my own business, and a couple of his disciples, they came over and they said, hey, we need to have these donkeys here for the Lord. And I gave them up. And Jesus rode into Jerusalem on my donkey. Wow, isn't that neat? He lived his whole lifetime for that one moment. Wasn't any religious thing involved. It wasn't any building a big mega church. It wasn't talking to 1,000 people about getting saved. He lent the Lord a donkey. And God blessed him for it. You remember the story of the little boy with the loaves and fishes? Jesus is preaching. There's 5,000 guys. And if there's 5,000 guys out there listening to the message, there's got to be a bunch of women, maybe not the same amount. Let's say there's 3,000 women. And then just by inference, there's a bunch of kids, teenagers, little kids and so forth. There's probably 10,000 people out there. And it's evening time. And there's no stores around. So Jesus says to them, how are we going to feed these people? And the disciples, well, I don't know, I don't know. And they don't have a clue. Now, Jesus could have created, 12 lunch trucks, and had the lunch trucks come out there and feed everybody, no big deal. He could have dropped manna from heaven. He could have done anything. But he waits, and Andrew comes up and says, hey, there's a little kid here, little boy, teenager. And you know what he said? He said, you guys can have my lunch. 7 loaves and 2 fishes. Or 7 fishes and 2 loaves, forget off the top of my head. Wasn't enough it was enough for one little boy. That was his lunch or supper. That was it. You got 10,000 people out there. Well, you know the story. Jesus multiplied the loaves and the fishes, and they just keep coming out of the basket, and each disciple had a basket, and Jesus would fill it up and they'd take off. Another one would fill it up and they would take off until everybody got fed. And when it was all over and done with, Each disciple had his basket there, and Jesus filled them all up. And so when the message is done, the food is done, the disciples picked up the leftovers, and each of them had a big old basket, and they had to carry back to wherever it was they were going that night. You think they weren't thinking in their head, what just happened? I'm lugging this big basket of food here. Where did it come from? Jesus made it. One little boy was at the right place at the right time. God used him in a way that he doesn't use a lot of us, or we don't avail ourselves of the opportunity for him to use us. Nothing religious there. Nothing biblical there. The boy gave up his lunch. Do you think in his mind that was a big deal? Probably not. A good-hearted little boy giving up a lunch. Nothing religious, nothing spectacular, nothing over the top. But God used it. I don't care if you're a plumber, a salesman, a teacher, retired, whatever it is. There's something in your life that God wants out of you. And it doesn't have to be religious. It doesn't have to be biblical. It doesn't have to be spiritual. Close with this. Isaiah chapter 55 tells us, my ways, this is God speaking, my ways are not your ways. My thoughts are not your thoughts. As the heaven is above the earth, so are my thoughts above your thoughts. What we think is important, making money, being healthy, being productive, being effectual, being good. We prioritize life like this. God's priority is not our priority. That's the problem. We think one way, he's thinking another way. We think what we're doing is so great, he thinks, no. I was more impressed with the little girl talking about a prophet in Israel. I was more impressed with the little boy who gave up his sack lunch. I was more impressed with a guy who lent his donkey so that Jesus could ride into Jerusalem. You can save your mega churches. You can save your big multi-million-dollar communication system. You can save, I'm on 700 TV stations. Keep those cards and letters coming in. You can save the fact that I've written 500 inspirational books that have reached 40 million people. Save it. I was more impressed with the donkey and the loaves and fishes and the little word of encouragement from a little girl. That's what impressed me. Proverbs chapter 3 tells us, trust in the Lord with all thine heart. Lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Heavenly Father, help us to get our ducks in a row. Help us to prioritize. Help us to get our minds fixed on you, on what you would have us to do. Not what we think you want us to do. Not what we think is going to bring us the most glory or bring us the most reward or the most recognition or the most pats on the back or the most raises, whatever it happens to be. But God, whether it's a word of encouragement, whether it's the loan of a donkey, whether it's the giving up of a sack lunch, these are the things that impressed you. God, help us to get this story straight. Help us to get the lesson. Help us to get the message. Our ways are not your ways. Our thoughts are not your thoughts. Help us to get in tune with you. I don't expect you to get in tune with us. You know us. You've been there and done that. You've seen this and seen that. We are not in your league. So, Father, help us to get in sync with you, to see things from your perspective. Help us to say, Lord, not my will, but thine be done. In Jesus' name.